Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork Podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Well, welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast. We are in episode 62, incredibly, Carson.
I love it, Hylke. It's so good to see you again. And I'm always thinking about you. So glad to be back on the show here and really excited to learn. So thanks for being here.
Excellent. Me too. And I'm very happy that we're going to start basically another part of the Connected Teamwork Podcast, which is going to be focused on the 12 Team Connectedness Practices. And I hand it to you, Carson, to lead us through this.
Yeah. No, thank you, Hylke. So if this is your first time joining us on the Connected Teamwork Podcast, thank you. If you've seen our format in the past, we've done a litany of different elements where, we've talked to guests on the connectedness culture that they've created and instilled and nurtured in their workforce. And we've also talked about a lot of the principles from Taming Your Crocodiles and how people can identify and unlearn the fears that they have. In fact, if you can see it, Taming Your Crocodiles right down here on my bookshelf. So it's a mainstay. Today, we're going to dive into a little bit of a pivot, and we're going to talk about the connectedness practices, and of which there are 12. And in the coming weeks, we're going to dive into each one of them individually. And so, Hylke, no real better place to start than kind of where does the concept for the 12 team connectedness practices come from?
Well, I was writing the sequel of the book to Taming Your Crocodiles called The Connectedness Quotient, How We Can Thrive Together. That's the working title. And as I was working on this book and I was working with teams, and I'm working with teams across the world, I noticed that there's this thing that really makes a difference whether connectedness actually takes root or not. And that is the simple act of spending time and attention on it. Just simply saying, hey, how connected am I to myself, to others, and to my purpose, to being here, to my higher intelligence? How connected am I? And to fuel that practice, what happens is to have that place, those places you can come back to. We call those practices. So that's how this idea of practices came about. So the book was written and it's like, well, how are teams actually going to do this day to day? And then I thought about how we do workshops and so on. And I figured, well, there's actually 12 practices that feature in each of those in some way that help teams to make progress. And they start with connecting to ourselves, the first 4 practices. The next 4 are connecting to each other, to others. And then the last 4 about connecting to our purpose.
I'm really excited about these. I have to say, just some of these seem like they could or should be intuitive, but unfortunately, sometimes we neglect some of these areas. And so definitely, for our audience, there's a lot of, really reflective thought that is going to be upcoming, and, ways that we can focus on being our best selves through this process, but also how we can serve others and meaningfully engage. No better place to start than number 1. What is the number 1 practice, Hylke, and why?
So it starts with taking good care of yourself. The CQ instrument, I call it. And CQ is this abbreviation that we thought of to say there's the intelligence of IQ, our thinking, the intelligence of EQ, how we regulate our emotions, and the intelligence of CQ, which is how deeply are we connected to our values and wisdom, each other, and to our purpose, which, if you distill that down, is how deeply are we connected to our higher intelligence, our higher powered wisdom that even goes further than my thinking and my feelings. It goes into, like, I have a conflict or difficult situation, decision to make. I go to a deeper place and I might get very still. And from that deeper place, I know what to do and what not to do. Like as my husband always reminds me, could you please, Hylke, think before you speak? And it doesn't mean like go through all the scenarios, but go to a deeper place. Is this who you really want to be? So the first practice is called take good care of yourself, the CQ instrument. And then it goes on, it says, accept and care for yourself, including your gifts and emotions, and enjoy yourself. So it's a practice. So the number one, I didn't start with set a big goal or anything like that. It starts with kind of where we end, which is if I'm not in my body, if I am not accepting and with myself, if I'm not regulating my own energy, then I'm of no good, because I'm going to be, trying to get something from you that's not yours to give. I'm not completely open and clear with the task at hand. I'm believing thoughts about myself that have nothing to do with reality. The first task is to be with ourselves. I think somebody wrote, if humans could learn to be with themselves in a room, that would solve all problems.
I love that you start there. I think it's important, especially as leaders, think about, we're always getting pulled in a million different directions. There's always something to do, some metric to chase, some call from above that, we've got to answer the bell on. But if we're not right with ourselves, we're not going to be able to bring 100%, much less 50% in some of these scenarios and do our best work. Or how are we going to best serve others if we're not right with ourselves? So I couldn't agree more. When you talk about self-acceptance, how do you define that? I almost think that there's practices within the practice as well. Like what are some of the practices that you would recommend to leaders that will help them move closer to being able to appreciate themselves?
So I always like to think about a situation that pulls us a little bit. So maybe you and I can both think about a challenge that's on our table right now. Like, and if you're a listener, think about a challenge on your table right now, because that's how these practices start to become real energetic. They start to have some energy, right? So a challenge that I'm facing right now is I have a conflict with a team member about how we're going to spend a resource. Okay. So accepting myself in this case means, first of all, that I have to accept that I have some emotion. Like, I'm not going to be Pollyannish about it. I feel a little bit of irritation about it. I feel a little bit of sadness that we have to revisit this again. And I'm a little tense about what the outcome will be, because of course I want my way, because of course my way is the best way, clearly, right?
Of course.
So but the accepting is to say, I have all these thoughts and I have these feelings in myself. Can I accept myself, even if I notice thoughts and feelings in myself that I'm not proud of? For example, that I think I know best, or even the little irritation that I don't like to have, or the part of me that wants to rush to an answer. But the acceptance goes there. So the question, the sub-practice, and I love you came up with that, Carson, is on a scale from 1 to 10, how much do I accept myself right now? Where 10 is completely, with all in it, like warts and everything included, and 1 is super judgmental. And I would say judgment is the enemy of connectedness, of relationship, of doing anything in the world. So what about you, Carson? What is your challenge you're facing, and how can you practice acceptance in that?
Yeah. As I listen to that, I tried to really think about, you said something important that I think is, how we approach the emotions that we find particularly difficult. The biggest challenge for me, the time of year, it's end of the calendar year. There's so many demands on the time of, my team and our business. And so, you almost feel like you're being pulled in a number of different directions. And something that actually harks back to where you and I met was a training that you did for us, it was like a culture change champions group that we did a few years back. And that's where you and I first met. Right. And something you instilled in me back then was the importance to take the balcony view. And this is actually going to help me transition to our next part, which is around balance, right? Something I've instilled in my team and that I have to constantly remind myself of is that balcony view. When you're in the thick of it, or you're rushing to put out fire upon fire upon fire, your effectiveness by default is going to be minimized, because you're going to be emotional about it. You're going to be stressed. You're not going to show up and be able to do your best for each individual situation, because you're trying to do too much. You're trying to take on the world. And so being able to take that balcony view approach of looking at the high level, take a step back, understand from a priority perspective, okay, what actually is on fire? What do I need to do right this moment? What's of the most pressing importance for my team, or for our customers, or for the business? How can I grapple with those elements? Also, where can I delegate? Where can I also maybe, balance out my scheduling, where, there are things that can move from today into next week. There are areas where I could have more discipline and rigor around my schedule, so that I can prioritize what needs to happen now. And taking that moment and taking that balcony view when you're identifying that some of these strong emotions are transpiring enables you to almost take that breath and come back to the situation with fresh eyes, and go into each situation from a priority perspective, and almost, consciously putting everything in its proper place. But, one of the elements that jumps out at me here is balance. And one of the things that you talk a lot about in this practice is, how do we bring balance? And that can look like a lot of different things in our lives, rest, family, friends, self-care. There's a lot of areas that are grappling for our attention, but to be our best selves, we've got to, we've got to prioritize ourselves, because often if we don't, nobody's going to do it for us. So how do you recommend, or are there any practices that you recommend that we as leaders can maybe integrate into our work-life rhythm, I like to call it, to have better balance?
So I love that question. The first piece for me is to appreciate, like you're saying, that for me to be able to be of service, I need to be in balance. Doesn't mean that I can't be of service when I'm off balance, because many of us operate that way. And the human being, we are quite smart, right? We can figure things out. However, for me to be of highest good, highest service to my team member, to my clients, to what I'm doing, the more I'm in balance, the more I can be of service. So the first thing is to say, being in balance is important, and it's not selfish. Right? That's part of our societal conditioning, to think that taking care of myself is selfish. Like, think about yourself being in a conflict, and maybe you feel the emotions are so high that you need to take a time out. And that, from the societal brain, might feel like that's very selfish, right? How inconsiderate, you're stepping away. That's not nice. Well, actually, it might be the nicest thing you can do, because in that moment, you say, I'm very conscious of the energy that I bring here. So I first need to find inner balance before I engage at all. Like, I wouldn't be doing you a service or this service at all. So to me, that's the first thing to say. And then the second thing is to not make balance like yet another thing that we have to do, right? Because our to-do lists in 2024, 2025 are super high already. So it's about, what are some small things that shifts I can make right now in this moment? Maybe I breathe more deeply. Maybe, as you said, I let go of some judgment thoughts that I have. Right? We start at very microscopic level of our thinking and our emotions. Like, okay, so what are some things that I can give myself some space? Maybe and then I go to the physical part. Maybe I give myself a few more breaks. I take some walks today. Maybe I make sure that I get enough sleep and water, and I'm conscious of the food I take. And then I get a bit more sophisticated, and I start thinking about my schedule, and I try to make sure that I'm not back to back all day, and have maybe at least 5-minute breaks in between. if not more, right? That seems like a big thing for some people, and might be a really good thing to do. So those are some of those practices, and then keep listening, because sometimes, despite all of our best efforts, our body mind still says, "Sorry, you're falling ill. You're having some pains. You have some aches." To me, like, I love the Cherokee saying, "Listen to the whispers before they become screams." Really listen and keep fine tuning. So maybe then, if you need to take a day off, take a day off. Take a nap, take a nap. It's okay. Because you're doing this to be kind to yourself and to be able to be of service to others.
Beautiful.
I'd love to hear after the break from you, Carson, about how you practice self-care, because I know you're a busy man also.
And I want to point out too, for our audience, that I think what you've beautifully articulated is the importance of really attuning to oneself. Where I do want to talk more about after the break, ways that you can, and as we kind of parlay this conversation into enjoyment and joy, how we can segue into that next section logically. So thank you, Hylke.
Thank you, Carson.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
So before the break, Carson, we talked about self-care. And if you're listening, we're talking about connected teamwork, connected team practices. And we're talking about the first practice, which is about how do we take good care of ourselves. We call this the CQ, Connectedness Quotient instrument. So how do you take care of yourself? How do you create balance?
Yeah, and it's good to be able to talk about this, because it's not an area where I've always been an example or been a pillar of excellence, because historically I've worked very, very hard, worked myself to the bone, and I think a lot of our audience can probably relate to that. In fact, when I first read Taming Your Crocodiles years ago, Hylke, that was one of the things that you really talked about in your consulting days, that, it was this drive for more and more and more and more. But a lot of times we go to that well time and time again, and eventually we come up empty. The challenge is there's this constant chase for more and more, and the demands and the asks are never going to stop. So, unfortunately, a lot of us feel compelled to just keep driving and driving and driving. One of the things that I like to talk about, and I think this is a great segue into the next segment, which is around enjoyment and joy, is how you can instill your passions or your unique strengths and superpowers, or things that you're excited about, into the day-to-day. And also finding the joy in the grind, as it were. I wrote a post a couple weeks ago about almost the poetry that I found in the grind. There are elements of my day-to-day that I don't enjoy, but there are a lot that I do enjoy. And one thing that I encourage people about, and especially when you're working as part of a connected team, you've got to know and understand your own why. And you've got to know and understand the why of everybody else that you seek to serve as part of your team. And so when you're a leader of a team specifically, looking at these ways that your team derives joy. I just went through appraisal season. So a lot of time was spent with my team looking at, and I'm one of those, I'm an unorthodox leader. So, they submit their notes, I submit my notes back, I send them in an email, I ask them to review them, and then we pretty much go off the cuff in the conversation. I want to spend the time meaningfully for them. I want to understand what makes them tick. What are their goals? What things do they really enjoy? And where do they derive joy that we can infuse into the day? The other thing, we ranked very highly on our employee scorecard of surveys around flexible work schedule. And, I think, looking at ways that we can meet everyone where they are, having the empathy for our team members that have family or health concerns where they need to unplug or prioritize health or people in their family. That's strongly encouraged, because to your earlier point, Hylke, when we show up, ideally we're as close to 100% as we can be. We're not always going to be at 100%, but we got to be as close as we can be. And what does that look like? It could be, maybe I take a couple of early morning calls on a walk outside with the dog. It could be I listen to some music while I file my expenses, or check email or something along those lines, or listen to an audiobook. Instilling and injecting these things that we enjoy and love doing throughout the day to break it up so that it isn't back to back to back calls. The other thing, and I used to laugh about this, we get prompts to, take focus time, or to block off learning time, or check your messages time. And I used to laugh and be like, I could never do something like that. I don't know why people do that. Now I do it myself, and I encourage my entire team to do it, because you have to have that downtime to be able to decompress, to check a message, to go, get a beverage, or to check in with a family member. And so instilling those things into your day can help you tremendously. Find those things that add joy and that you can instill into your day to day. Hylke, I'd love to hear from you, especially as we're talking about finding that balance and that work-life rhythm. How do you balance striving for personal growth with the act of enjoying life?
So you talked about this in a way already, Carson, which is thinking about what makes you tick, and really what makes you tick. So I sing in a choir, and one of the reasons that I enjoy it is because the conductor figured out which group I'm in. I'm a tenor, right? I'm not a baritone or a bass. So I like singing tenor, right? So when I'm in a team, I need to understand, what am I about? And there's lots of instruments like diversity insights and things like that that can get you a sense of what you're about, what brings you joy. Are you like a strategic thinker? Are you a pragmatist? Are you a doer? Are you a person that likes to execute? Are you a person that is interested in really making sure we're all in this together? We're forging connections. Are you the thoughtful? What makes you tick? So that question to me is very important to joy, and then creating space for it. Oh no, as opposed to falling into the rat race mindset where everything is about having to get it done quick. I was working on the proposal for the book this morning, and I got a whole bunch of feedback from a publicist I'm working with. And part of my mind wants to almost AI it through and get it done. There's no joy in that. Maybe the little dopamine hit I get when it's done, but it's not joyful. So that take a step back and say, oh yeah, how can I think about this a little different? What's a good example here? Ooh, like that. So then it's like cooking a good meal. We just were in Thanksgiving week in the US, right? The turkey or the gravy or the greens taste very different if you just get it done versus, ooh, maybe it needs a little bit more seasoning. I don't think it's quite done yet. So to me, joy comes from finding your gift and putting that gift to good use. And it's not just one thing, right? It's not just I have to be, but just finding different ways to figure out what you love, and then make space for it. Make space for it. And then as it goes, because our mind is so conditioned to say, is it done yet? Most people's Thanksgiving time, for those of us who are cooking, is not spent eating. It's spent cooking. And can we enjoy the meeting, the being in the conversation together, the difficult conversation, and the creation of the email, the preparation of the performance review, in the whatever we're doing? That moment is never going to come again.
It's powerful. As you think about this, I know on this show, a lot of times we like to focus on the practical advice, so for the folks that are watching and listening today, Hylke, this isn't the easiest topic. I love that you kind of come out of the gate swinging with this from a practice perspective, because it is so critical to get ourselves right, to show up as best we can for those that we lead, those that we seek to serve. What advice would you give to somebody who struggles particularly with self-appreciation? I know you talked a little bit about some of the instilling joy and figuring out what makes them tick, but what are some other areas where people that are struggling with self-appreciation can find some more fulfillment and enjoyment in their daily life?
Well, the first thing would be to stop trying to change yourself. It's very counterintuitive in lots of the training that we give. That's about growth. But first of all, find this place in yourself where you can say, yeah, I'm going to accept everything that's happening between my ears, how I feel in my team with others. I'm just going to be in a place of total acceptance, which doesn't mean I'm going to be a pushover. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do my best. No. But in this moment, I'm going to take a moment to just appreciate what's here. That's, you could say, also a practice of gratitude, like being grateful for everything that's coming up, whether it's great, not so great, at least it's alive. That. So appreciate the aliveness of what's happening within you. That's number one. And number two is interrupt the momentum of doing. So just take a moment, as you were saying, Carson, to step out of the hamster wheel and say, okay, take a walk, even if it's 5 minutes. Take a deep breath, listen to some music, do something that lets yourself know that it's time to polish your instrument. What would you say for you, Carson? What would you say to somebody who's like, I'm not quite sure how to do this? Where would you say to start?
Yeah. I love that we've spent a considerable amount of time talking about the mindset, the mindfulness, the gratitude, and then I think even just finding your joy in the moment, instilling some of the things that you're passionate about and that you care about, because I think that's a lot of where it starts. For me, I've read a lot over the last couple of years about Stoicism and, ways that rather than what I was maybe originally conditioned to do, which was push away or push down my emotions and just plow through, which leads to burnout and exhaustion, acknowledging how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that way, and addressing it in the moment. And these are things that nobody's going to do it for you. So it's making that conscious decision, Hylke, of recognizing, wow, I'm really overwhelmed with the amount of work that I have on my plate today. So let me look at my day. And I'll even give today as an example. This would be my advice to you as a leader. If you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling some of these emotions burgeoning up, taking a look at your day to day. Are there things today that are not mission critical that can move? Are there non-negotiables? One of the worst things that you can do is finish a day and be absolutely exasperated and exhausted and look back and be like, what did I really accomplish? It's one of the worst feelings there is. And you can eradicate that. When I'm up in the morning, I get up before anybody else, I hit the gym, and that's when I come up with my best ideas. I don't have anyone trying to talk to me. I can get in my own head. I can listen to my audiobook. I can watch a show, whatever it is. And that's when I come up with my 5 non-negotiables per day. And those are the things that if I get nothing else done, but if I get those 5 things done, the day was a win. And those types of things, like having those micro wins throughout the day, can really help you. It can give you that dopamine hit that you so desperately crave. And you're still going to get pulled into all the fires. You're still going to be needed. You're still going to do these things that you need to do. But these mission critical, like mountain moving things that you want to do, you're going to get those done too. Inserting and instilling joy. Sometimes I'll look at my day and, maybe I slept terribly or, was up in the middle of the night with a sick kid or a pet or whatever it is. I didn't get to get up and do my workout. So I might look at my day and realize, hey, I can go for a walk or a run during this call, or I can move things around where I can still get that me time, and scheduling that me time. It breaks up the day. Instead of being back to back to back for 8, 9, 10 hours, you can have that break in the action. I was on a call recently with a colleague, and they asked me, like, Carson, how in the world? My 5th book was published last month. And I was asked, like, how in the world do you have time to do this stuff? You're clearly working all the time. You've got a family, 3 kids. how do you write a book? And it's all in how you schedule things into your day. I mean, don't get me wrong, it took me years to write this thing. I've been wanting to do it for years, but by making intentional time, so intentionality around your priorities and what you want to get done, those are the types of things that can be mountain moving in your day, in your inputs, in your outcomes, and in the impact that you have.
Love that. I really appreciate, Carson, what you're saying is taking the deliberate time, making it deliberate, making it a priority. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, which is a form of self-care, and listening to any podcast that's about self-development is a form of self-care, making it deliberate and be creative. I'll close with this. One person once told me to make self-care last, make it something you like. Make it something you like. Don't take all the prescriptions from everybody else. Make it yours. What do you like? Maybe it's what you do what Carson does. You get up in the morning and you exercise. Maybe you watch a show. Maybe you meditate. Maybe you take walks. Maybe you go for a swim. Maybe you take a cold plunge. Whatever you do, make it yours. So you've been listening to episode 62 of the Connected Teamwork Podcast. I'm here with Microsoft leader Carson Heady and salesman on fire, author, human extraordinaire, and great friend. Great to be with you all today, and look forward to seeing you next time on the Connected Teamwork Podcast. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.